Magomed Ankalaev just did exactly what he told us he was going to do. He went up against Alex Pereira. He stood on the feet for 25 minutes with Alex Pereira. He outstruck Alex Pereira, the former two-weight world champion in Glory Kickboxing, the turned two-weight world champion in the UFC, and he beat Alex Pereira to become the new UFC light heavyweight champion of the world. 14 consecutive fights without tasting defeat for Magomed Ankalaev, a 14-fight unbeaten streak with 3 consecutive victories. Johnny Walker with a knockout back in January of 2024, a decision over Alexander Rakic at UFC 308 last October, and now he is the new champion in the 205-pound weight class by dethroning Alex Pereira, arguably the biggest thing going in mixed martial arts right now, the face of the company no more. March 17th of 2018 is the lone blemish on the record of Magomed Ankalaev in a fight that he was winning up until the 4-minute and 59-second point of the third and final round against Paul Craig in his UFC debut, where he would lose via triangle choke submission, and since then he has not looked back. And the stretch includes victories over former top 15 opponent Jan Kudalaba, ranked opponent Nikita Krylov, 3 former title challengers in Volkan Oezdemir, Thiago Santos, and Anthony Smith all consecutively, and the victories that we already touched on, a knockout of Johnny Walker, a decision of Rakic, and now Alex Pereira. One of the best resumes currently in the light heavyweight division belongs to the new champion, Magomed Ankalaev. And for the fight breakdown specifically, Magomed Ankalaev we would see outstrike Alex Pereira 94-76 in terms of significant strikes and 127-97 in total strikes landed. So it goes back to what he said. He promised he was going to stand on the feet with Alex Pereira and beat him at his own game, and that is exactly what we see here in the aftermath. Now, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. It didn't come easy for Magomed Ankalaev, and I think it is fair to say he attempted to wrestle and grapple, and as a matter of fact, in terms of the official numbers, went 0 for 12 on takedown defense. Alex Pereira, definitely, that was the best part of the fight for him. That was the best part of this performance. The best evolution that we saw in this 25-minute outing was his takedown defense, being able to keep the fight on the feet. However, I feel that it was the threat of that takedown that held Alex Pereira back from truly pulling the trigger like we typically see him do in his other fights. And of course, I think you have to pair the fear of the takedown with the high-level skill set that Ankalaev has as a master of sport in Sambo. He is very good and very well complete in terms of a striking arsenal. We've seen it time and time again with his knockout victories that he has possessed in the UFC and victories over other high-level opponents and kickboxers like Alexander Rakic as recent as last October. But it did feel like, for me and a lot of other people in the MMA community, that the longer this fight would stay on the feet and Ankalaev couldn't really mix in the grappling, that is where Alex Pereira would get his reads and eventually pull away in this fight, potentially leading to a late finish or a decision on the scorecards, because Pereira typically gets better as fights goes on. And while round number 5 may have been the most clear round for Alex Pereira, it really was Magomed Ankalaev who led the dance, who kept Pereira on the back foot, kept him up against the fence for a majority of this fight, and that is what paid the biggest dividends as the fight carried forth. And even though Ankalaev would go 0 for 12 officially on takedown defense, he would rack up over a round's worth of control time throughout their entire fight, with 5 minutes and 42 seconds of clinch control up against the cage that would wear down Alex Pereira a little bit, in my opinion. And it truly just was a masterful game plan for Magomed. Obviously, he didn't get a finish like I'm sure he wanted to do and to really prove that he is elite in the striking realm, but he did the next best thing. He outpointed and outstruck Pereira everywhere that the fight truly went. And you may be sitting there thinking, wow, this must have been a really high-level back-and-forth fight. And, well, it was high-level, and it was back-and-forth, but it wasn't the most awe-inspiring fight. You're not going to go back and rewatch this fight time and time again. It was one of those fights that is relatively forgettable and not the greatest title-winning performance from a fan perspective for Magomed Ankalaev to put his name on the map by beating the biggest thing going in Alex Pereira. But I don't think that matters to Magomed. I think getting that gold belt wrapped around his waist is what mattered most, and that is exactly what happened. And in terms of what's next, well, if Alex Pereira would have won this fight and defended for the 4th time of his light heavyweight title reign in just 11 months, I think it would have been a massive super fight up in the heavyweight division between him and John Jones and or Tom Aspinall. I think that is what was going to be next, and I felt that maybe if it was a very decisive victory for Ankalaev or even a finish, like we saw with Pereira losing the rematch to Israel Adesanya, then maybe he would go up to heavyweight anyways and begin his career there. But it was neither of those. It was a pretty back and forth fight, a closely contested fight. Yes, it wasn't a split decision. No judges gave the fight to Alex Pereira, but we would see the official scorecards, 2 of 3 giving 2 rounds to Pereira and 3 to Ankalaev, and 1 scorecard giving 4 rounds to Ankalaev and just 1 to Pereira. So a close fight in terms of the actual numbers, a close fight in terms of what rounds went which fighter's way on the judges' eyes. And for me and my buddies that were watching and most of the MMA community, a pretty close fight for us to score as well, because rounds 2 and 4 were the most convincing rounds of the entire fight, and those went to Magomed Ankalaev. Round 5 was the most convincing round for Alex Pereira, in my opinion, because of the big strikes that he landed. Yes, Ankalaev held him up against the fence for a majority of the latter half of the round, maybe the last 2 minutes or so, but I didn't feel like he did enough to steal the round after the big shots that Alex landed. So to me and my friends, it came down to rounds 1 and round 3. But apparently, maybe it shouldn't have came down to that at all, because all the judges agreed on those 2 rounds. All 3 gave round 1 to Pereira, and all 3 gave round 3 to Ankalaev, so what the hell do I know? But I want to hear from you all in the comments below. First off, what did you think of the fight? What did you make of the performance from Ankalaev? To me, yes, while it, again, wasn't the most memorable fight we'll ever see, it was a very good game plan. He stayed the course, and it paid off. And how did you score this fight? Did you believe that Pereira had done enough in rounds 1 and 3 to maybe get 3 of the 5 rounds? Or did you agree with the judges and that Ankalaev just outpointed Pereira just enough in all of the necessary rounds? And lastly, what do you all think is next? Is Ankalaev going to defend in a rematch with Alex Pereira? Or will Pereira end his run at the 205-pound weight class and move up to heavyweight to finish off his career and follow the kind of path that he did from middleweight to 205? For me, I believe that it's going to be a rematch. I think that there's a sour taste in the mouth of Alex Pereira. I believe that it was a close enough fight to justify a rematch, paired with Pereira defending his title successfully 3 times. I think if they both won it, which in the aftermath it seems that that is exactly what they both want, is a rematch, and I think that is exactly what we will get. And now that we are done with the UFC 313 main event title fight discussion, let's jump into the rest of the card. We start in the co-main event where Justin Gaethje improved to 2-0 against Rafael Fiziev in a fight that was just as good as the first one 2 years ago. We all know that we were supposed to get an absolute bloodbath between Justin Gaethje and Dan Hooker, but about 2 weeks ago now, Hooker would fall out of the fight due to a broken hand in sparring in one of his last sparring sessions before flying over to the United States. And in stepped Rafael Fiziev, and on what I believe they said 12 days notice officially, and he put up an amazing fight given the circumstances, having to take this on short notice, having to fly across the world on short notice, and returning from a nasty knee injury that he suffered at the hands of Mateusz Gamrot toward the end of 2023. Fiziev looked very, very good throughout the entirety of this fight, but specifically in round number 1, where he hit Justin Gaethje with big shots on the feet, had 2 takedowns mixed in, and it looked as though we were going to have a very intriguing fight and a very different fight than what we saw in 2023. But in rounds 2 and 3, that is where Justin Gaethje began to pull away. He kept the fight standing. He got into the dirty boxing range, and that was where a lot of the fun exchanges were happening in this fight. For Gaethje, he found the mark with some nasty uppercuts, one that even dropped Fiziev late in round 2 and nearly led to a finishing sequence. And for Fiziev, he was teeing off to Gaethje's body, landing nice shots with the hands and mixing in some knees. The clinch work was very, very fun because it wasn't the clinch that we typically see up against the fence working for takedowns. This was clinch work, phone booth, right in the middle of the cage. Both guys trying to land short strikes, very powerful short strikes, and Gaethje got the better of those. He gets the nod, 29-28, unanimous decision victory. He's now won 3 of his last 4 fights. 2 of those, granted, are to the very same man in Rafael Fiziev, and he bounces back from the devastating knockout loss that he suffered to the hands of Max Holloway back in April of 2024 at UFC 300, where a lot of people were hesitant about Gaethje's return after suffering such a severe knockout. Even Justin Gaethje recognized and acknowledged that sentiment, and he came into this fight as the betting underdog, even though he was in a full camp. He had already beaten Rafael Fiziev once, and, well, Rafael Fiziev was coming in on short notice without a camp, and for the first time in a year and a half after a knee injury, and yet Justin Gaethje was the betting underdog. I'm sure many of you cashed out on that underdog money. And that is now 14 UFC fights for Justin Gaethje and 14 post-fight bonuses, as they have earned the official fight of the night, taking it out of Ozzy Diaz and Jordan Santos in the very first fight of the night, which is unfortunate for those 2 newcomers to the UFC, because that was a hell of a fight. If you didn't get to see that, go check it out, because I might not be able to touch on it here, but they went to war. The Jordan Santos and Ozzy Diaz get their shine here. It should have been the fight of the night still, in my opinion, because that's how much output there was. There was over 600 strikes, over 300 strikes landed nearly, but I digress. Gaethje, fight of the night. They're a married couple at this point. I want to give Rafael Fiziev his flowers. We ought to bow down to this man for coming in, saving this fight, keeping Justin Gaethje on the card, and delivering a fight of the night for the fans for the second time that these two have done. And to come back after the layoff, short notice, knee injury, it really just speaks to the man and the warrior that Rafael Fiziev is. And if you look at that record, you see 3 straight red strikes, right? 3 straight losses. But dig into that a little deeper. He had the majority decision, very close fight with Gaethje in March of 2023. Then he has a main event slot against Mateusz Gamrot in a fight that really barely got going before the knee injury occurred. And then here, 12 days notice, steps in, takes the first round pretty convincingly, but just couldn't quite keep up as the fight went on, being that he wasn't in a full camp. I still believe in Rafael Fiziev. I think he is a legitimate threat and problem to many of the top 15 players in this lightweight division. But for Justin Gaethje, I feel like he's in a kind of a weird spot right now. So what do we do with him next? It doesn't seem that he's going to be next for Islam Makhachev. Really, we don't know what is going to be next for Islam Makhachev. It seems that Ilia Topuria would fit that bill, but he kind of tweeted a weird one a couple days ago where he said, "You guys won't believe what is to come next," which makes me think, well, we're all kind of expecting him to fight for the title at lightweight against Islam because he vacated his 145-pound belt. So it wouldn't be that unbelievable if that's what's next. Some people are throwing out Conor McGregor. I'm not really sure what's going to be next. I'm sure we'll find out soon. So I want to hear from you all. What do you want to see next for Justin Gaethje, who throughout the week heading in, I believe this may have been on Embedded or in the Media Day scrum, he said he had space on his wall for 2 more posters, and well, this fills up one of them. So will we see Gaethje have just one more fight in his career, who is now 36 years old, 14 UFC fights, every single one of them absolute wars? Who or what is next for Justin Gaethje? Do we want to take a quick look at the state of the division right now? Armen Tsarukyan maybe could be an option. It seems as though Armen is going to have to face someone else next before getting his crack at Islam Makhachev. That's how Dana reacted in January at UFC 311. Honestly, I'm fully on board for that. It's a fresh matchup. It's a up-and-comer versus an older guy that's been in the top 5 for years at this point. Actually, I think I just did it. Armen Tsarukyan, Justin Gaethje, book it. Next, we go to the featured bout, but we stay in the lightweight division as Ignacio Bahamondes, the 27-year-old out of Chile, has now won 6 of his last 7 fights with 3 straight first-round finishes, none bigger than the first-round triangle choke submission at UFC 313 over Jalin the Tarantula Turner. 17-5 overall. 13 out of his 17 victories by way of finish, tied for the tallest man in the division at 6'3" with Jalin Turner. And wow, what a performance. What a big time outing for Ignacio, who got a highlight reel knockout at Noche UFC in September, now gets a highlight reel submission over a perennial ranked guy and ultra dangerous opponent in Jalin Turner. The sky is the limit for Bahamondes, who at one point was just 3-2 in the UFC. He was going to be good for some fights, but maybe wouldn't quite reach very high heights. But now, after these consecutive victories and the performances and the way in which he's putting away his opponents, this man is a legitimate problem in the lightweight division, as he is just now about to enter his prime years, only 27, as I already said. He's going to jump into at least the number 13 spot, taking that away from Jalin Turner. And I think a great option would be Beneil Dariush. And I think that's even who he... No, actually, that's another lightweight on the main card that called out Beneil Dariush. We'll get there in just a minute. But I wouldn't mind Bahamondes versus Beneil Dariush, Bahamondes versus Renato Money Moicano, or even Bahamondes versus Rafael Fiziev. You give me any one of those three in his next fight, which in my opinion should be a main event of a fight night card, or at minimum another featured bout on a high-level pay-per-view like this. That is what I believe should be next for Ignacio. What do you think? Do you want to see him against Dariush, against Moicano, against Fiziev, or is there someone else that tickles your fancy as a great matchup for Ignacio? And I do just want to quickly tip the cap to Jalin Turner, as it seems all but certain that he's going to decide to hang up the gloves and retire at just 29 years young. I really hope that he reconsiders, but if he is not really feeling it, I can't blame him. I don't want to see him going out there not fully equipped and prepared and then suffer damage. Jalin Turner, man, what a great prospect. At one point, he was on a 5-fight finishing streak, and then he would have razor-thin fights with Mateusz Gamrot and Dan Hooker. You can argue he could have won both of those fights, maybe even should have, dare I say. Then he had the almost knockout of Renato Moicano, where he tried to walk it off, and had he not tried to walk it off, he probably wins that fight if he just lands one or two more punches. The vicious knockout of Bobby Green, King Green now, and here he suffers a first-round submission to Ignacio. He had a very vulnerable, open interview with one of my favorite journalists in the game, Aaron Bronstetter, and he posted that on X. If you haven't seen that already, I highly recommend going to check that out. 5 minutes of your time that you won't regret. Jalin Turner really showed his human side. You could tell how emotional he was, how tough of a decision this is for him. So my hat is off to him. If we see him back in the cage, great, because I still believe that he has great potential. But if we don't, I hope he stays close to the MMA space. He's very well spoken. He's very mature. He's very intelligent. I want to see him stick around the UFC and around mixed martial arts. He has a lot left to give at just 29. And before revisiting the lightweight division for a third time, we have to take a trip down to the women's strawweight division first, as we saw the number 5 ranked Amanda Lemos hold her spot in the top 5 by defeating and taking out the momentum of the number 7 ranked 23-year-old Iasmin Lucindo, who was 14 years younger than Amanda Lemos at 37, but it wasn't enough, as honestly Lemos kind of dominated this fight en route to the unanimous decision victory. And to me, it was clear. It was the level of competition that Lemos should face versus Iasmin. That is what was going to pay the most dividends, and that is exactly what happened, as Lucindo was not able to defend the takedowns of Lemos, which going into the fight you would have felt would have been the opposite. Lemos would want to strike, and Lucindo would want to get the fight to the ground, but that is not what we saw here. Lemos used her veteran expertise to outpoint Lucindo and get the bounce back victory after having dropped a fight in 2024 to arguably the number 1 contender at strawweight, Virna Jandiroba. Now obviously we know she's scheduled to take on Yan Xiaonan next month, but I digress. She's won 2 of her last 3 fights, and again, look at who she's been fighting. If you go back to December of 2021, Angela Hill, Jessica Andrade, Michelle Waterson-Gomez, Marina Rodriguez, Zhang Weili title fight, Mackenzie Dern, Virna Jandiroba. She's fought the best of the best at 115 pounds, has Amanda Lemos. And now what will we see her do next, being that she has already fought so many of the great fighters in this weight class? I think a fight that makes absolute 100% total sense is Amanda Lemos versus Tatiana Suarez. Both of them lost in title fights to Zhang Weili. Tatiana just lost at UFC 312 last month in February. Lemos lost in 2023 to Zhang Weili, but just bounced back from her loss to Virna Jandiroba, so she's back in the W column. Number 2 versus number 5, I think it makes all the sense in the world. Now, to be fair, if I'm not mistaken, I talk a lot about fights, I make a lot of clips and everything, so I'll have to revisit this and see on social media. I believe I called for Mackenzie Dern to get the fight against Tatiana Suarez, so honestly, I'm fine with either one of those being next for Tatiana because they both make sense. So I guess we'll just see who gets the Tatiana Suarez sweepstakes. Will it be Lemos or will it be Mackenzie Dern? You let me know which one of those two matchups you would look forward to the most. Now we jump back to the lightweight division as the main card opener featured no, I'm just going to say it. It featured the 2025 Knockout of the Year. Mark it down. I'm recording this on Sunday, March 9th. The fights took place on Saturday, March 8th. It's a wrap.
It's over, ladies and gentlemen.
Mauricio Ruffy just secured one of the best highlight reel knockouts that you will see in UFC history with a beautiful spinning wheel kick that put Bobby Green out cold.
He didn't wait, kick Green up.
Just 2 minutes and 7 seconds into the very first round of their fight, the Fighting Nerds takeover is unbelievable. 12-1 with 11 knockouts to his name, 28 years old, long and rangy for this lightweight division, and now 3-0 in the UFC, a Dana White Contender Series alum. This man, alongside Carlos Prates, Jean Silva, and Caio Bahamondes, are absolute problems. And if you just watch Mauricio fight, who does he remind you of? The way that he stands, the wide base, the bouncing on his feet, the hands low. He is an orthodox Conor McGregor. He stands the exact same, moves the exact same, and has the same precision and power that Conor carried during his rise at 145 pounds. Seriously, take a look at those two mirrored in each other. The biggest difference is that Conor was a lefty and Mauricio is a righty, but my goodness, is this man and this team right now arguably one of the biggest things going in the UFC. The Fighting Nerds takeover, all in different weight classes, mind you. Caio Bahamondes at middleweight, Jean Silva at featherweight, Mauricio Ruffy at lightweight, and Carlos Prates at welterweight. We could be talking a world where all 4 of these men go on to become UFC champions. That would be one of the most electric storylines in the history of any team ever in mixed martial arts. And while King Green wasn't ranked in the top 15 anymore, we know that he had been ranked prior to this fight. And I think after a victory like this, after a performance like this, after winning 3 consecutive fights in the UFC, Ruffy better have a number next to his name come Tuesday morning, and at a bare minimum, if he doesn't have a number, he should be fighting someone with a number. And he is the man who called out Beneil Dariush on the heels of a 2-fight skid to Charles Oliveira and Arman Tsarukyan. He was pulled from his fight at UFC 311 against Renato Moicano because of the whole title situation where Moicano was then granted the short notice title fight against Islam because of Arman Tsarukyan's back injury. So do you want to see Mauricio Ruffy versus Beneil Dariush? Or, similar to what I said with Ignacio Bahamondes, do you want to see Moicano or do you want to see Fiziev? I think both of them are outsiders about to come into the top 15 at lightweight, and they have very similar opponents that are going to happen next. I think those 2 guys will fight people from that 3-name list. It's just a matter of how you want to pair them all together. Then there's 2 more big performances that I want to touch on from the prelims before we head on out of here today. And first, it's Bruno Ferreira versus Armen Petrosyan, where Bruno got the 2nd round submission with just 33 seconds remaining in that round. The short and stocky 32-year-old middleweight is now 13-2 and keeps his 100% finish rate intact, 9 knockouts, 4 submissions, and he's been finished in both of his losses. The definition of a kill or be killed fighter is the Hawk, Bruno Ferreira out of Brazil, who has never seen the judges' scorecards, and let me check here, has only seen the 3rd round once. He's a 2022 Contender Series alum, and he's 4-2 thus far in his UFC career throughout 2023 into 2025. And his only losses, Abus Magomedov last year at UFC 308, and Nursultan Ruziboev, who's one of the most dangerous men on the outside looking in the middleweight division. I'm not saying that a title is necessarily in his future, but if he can continue to get better while holding on to what's left of his prime at 32 years old, he can cause some severe problems to a lot of guys in the middleweight division, and maybe even some of them in the top 15. Time will tell. And last but not least, for the former multi-fight PFL veteran, Carlos Leal is now 1-1 in the UFC as he got his first victory in the promotion with a brutal beatdown of the veteran Alex Morono, where he got the finish 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the first round. You can argue that he could maybe be 2-0 in the UFC as he had a very competitive fight with Hanat Fakhretdinov back at UFC 308 in October in his debut, but nonetheless, he's on the board. He's 22-6 with 13 finishes. He's 30 years old, so right in his prime, and he's won 3 of his last 4 fights. Carlos Leal came into this fight as a minus 700 or more favorite, depending on what sportsbook you use, and I thought that line was way off. I'm not saying that he was going to come in and lose to Alex Morono, but that line shocked me, being that Morono has fought so many guys for so many years in the UFC's divisions. But oh my goodness, in the aftermath, Carlos Leal didn't look like a minus 700 favorite. He looked like a minus 2,000 favorite. What a performance. So that is it for the UFC 313 recap. I want to hear all of your thoughts in the comments below. What is next for Ankalaev and Pereira? Is it a rematch? Who is next for Justin Gaethje in his kind of state of limbo in the lightweight division right now? And everything else in between, especially in that lightweight division. 3 really big performances and outings in the 155-pound weight class. We shouldn't be surprised. It's the best in the world for a reason. If you enjoyed this recap, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Every single week, I recap the most meaningful results from every single card. Heading into each weekend, I preview and break down the best fights and talk about all of the best storylines, and I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, and you can follow on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where podcast episodes release there every Friday and Monday. Have a great week, and I will see you in the next video.